Without further ado, I'm going to introduce the fantastic Sleep Project people because this one is all about sleep. So, Dr. Eidn and Dr. Caitlin, we've known each other a while now, and you guys are our sleep experts, resident sleep experts within Wellonomics, but you are the founders of the Sleep Project. And we're absolutely delighted to have you on this because every single piece of data that comes back for us, sleep is always in the top 3 pain points for every company. We launched Wellonomics Snapshot last week. 120 plus companies have done it, and every single one of them, sleep appears as maybe not number 1, but certainly within the top 3. So lots of stuff out there, lots of research, that suggests that if you sleep better, you'll live 5 years longer if you're a male, 2 years longer if you're a female. I think everybody knows that sleep is important, but what I love about you guys is that you're actually trying to do something about it because there is clearly a mismatch in a need and a service. So if you could, we'll start with you, Caitlin. Introduce yourself, the Sleep Project, and then pass over to Eidn, and we will just see what happens. Not much more can go wrong today, to be honest, so let's roll.
Super, and thanks, Glenn, for having us on the podcast. We're delighted to join you and to talk about sleep, which we're really passionate about. Today we've got me and Eidn, who are 2 out of the 3 main people in the Sleep Project. Our third is Polly, who's a paediatric sleep specialist. So we deal with all ages of sleep problems. Both Eidn and I are GPs by background, and we've been working on this front line for the last 20 years. We worked through the COVID pandemic and were part of the kind of leadership team managing staff and the COVID vaccination program and looking after our clinics at the same time. And what we found was that there was a massive increase in sleep problems and mental health problems. And we were finding that every day we were getting a sort of floodgate of people who were really impacted, and that there wasn't the services out there to support them. Both Eidn and I have had interest in sleep and sleep medicine for some years going back, but it was more of a kind of a side project and something that we brought into our clinical practice. But we decided that now was the time to bring together the team with our mission of bringing great sleep to people with all the health and well-being benefits that it brings. And so we came together and have been offering help and education to everyone that we can reach to try and get busy people sleeping really well again.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. And again, like I said, the need for it is crazy ridiculous. Every month our data comes back and sleep is always the number 1 thing. Over half the people that are on our platform through Snapshot, etc., like I've said before, it's always sleep. So Eidn, could you maybe introduce yourself, expand a little bit more on how you service that and what you guys actually do to help try and solve basically the biggest problem in the world, I would say.
No pressure then. Yeah, hi, I'm Eidn. I'm also been a GP for 20 years and along with Caitlin, we went to medical school together, in fact. And I guess one of the real kind of triggers for what we're doing with the Sleep Project is we both realised through our NHS practice that there's just basically non-existent sleep services in the NHS. It just isn't a service for most of the country.
Yeah.
There are 5 years at medical school, and we had one lecture that was kind of sleep based, and even that was very kind of specific. It was on obstructive sleep apnea, which is what most of the kind of NHS sleep provision is.
Why do you think
targeted towards.
Why do you think that is? Just one. I mean, one lecture just sounds crazy for sleep. Such a bit, is it?
Yeah, it's absolutely bonkers. Given that we kind of spend a third of our lives asleep. I think that really kind of sleep science has kind of lagged a little bit behind a lot of the rest of medical science, because really for decades we thought that sleep was this kind of passive process where your brain switches off and you just kind of rejuvenate overnight. But actually the last kind of 20 years or so, the more that sleep science has advanced, the more we realise it's the complete opposite of that, really. It's a very, very active process for the brain where it goes through lots and lots of different cycles of different processes which help to they do help to kind of get rid of toxins and rejuvenate the brain, but they do so much more than that. It's a very active process. And I think that sleep science is starting to catch up now, but it's really the rest of medicine has had a real head start on it. And sometimes it's difficult to kind of change these really well-established kind of things. There's a lot of funding in the NHS going towards cardiology. There's a lot of funding going towards care of the elderly, and rightfully so. But sleep has really been something that's kind of lagged behind. I think attitudes are starting to change, but it's still very early. And most of the NHS, there's no provision at all for people with insomnia. Whereas, we know that about 30% of people will struggle with insomnia at any given moment. So it's a huge, huge problem. And what we're trying to do is try and, because there's so many people, there's such a big unmet need. We do kind of offer one-to-one programs and those sorts of things, but we're trying to focus on creating digital programs which we can get to people at scale en masse, that will help most people with sleep problems. If they go through the steps that we kind of suggest in our digital programs, most of those people will be able to improve their sleep to a really good degree.
Brilliant.
So that's kind of the idea behind what we're doing, really.
Fantastic. And we love the fact that we are all part of the same thing, really. We're trying to help people's well-being, and with sleep being that important, like I said, we've been absolutely ready and waiting to do this podcast with you guys. And it's not just that you're medical doctors, and this is the thing is, I myself, I always think, doctors, they know everything, they're okay, they're fine, but sleep affects everybody. And from what I understand, you guys have also suffered with sleep problems as well.
Yeah, so both Eidn and I have had sleep problems in the past, and that's really where our journey learning about the treatments for sleep came from. Myself, about 10 years ago, I was going through fertility treatment, was feeling stressed and not sleeping, and I was finding I was awake all night and having recurrent worries and thoughts going through my head and just not able to switch off. And from my kind of classic medical training that I'd had at medical school, my experience as a GP, there just wasn't any easy answers. And I didn't want to go see my doctor. I think quite similar to lots of people, because they often, when you go see your doctor, you get put on sleeping tablets or antidepressants or anxiety medications. And for me, that I didn't feel like that was the problem. I felt there was other things going on, and that I wanted to try and find my way through the journey to better sleep. And it then started a big research project for me, because, as Eidn says, it wasn't part of classic medical training, and some of the techniques are what previously was considered kind of more Eastern-focused medicine, which now is coming more and more into the mainstream and has some really good evidence behind it about utilizing your body's natural biology and switches that help enhance the sleep process, turning off the kind of sympathetic nervous system, the kind of fight or flight response. Many of us in this modern culture spend a huge amount of our time in a fight or flight stress response. And it is possible to turn off those switches using your behaviors, your the mechanisms within your body, and it's just knowing which ones you need to focus on to be able to turn on sleep and turn off everything else.
Wow.
And as a woman as well, the kind of interest between hormones and sleep and the other kind of cycles and everything else that can feed into that was something that I found fascinating. And those changes were so life-changing that I felt that we needed to get the message out there, because it works, and it works really well.
That's amazing. And again, Western medicine tends to be drugs, and I think there's always a better way to do it. Eidn, what was your sort of sleep issue, or was it? I mean, clearly it will be different, but
yeah. Oh God, I mean, I don't know where to start. I have. I guess where it first started was I've never been a morning person. I'm terrible in the mornings. I can barely speak, and I always thought. I remember thinking it's probably back when I was at medical school. How come everything else that is difficult, the more you do it, the easier it gets? But getting up in the morning it wasn't getting any easier at all. No. And I know now it's because of my chronotype. I'm what we call chronotype. I'm a late type, an evening type. So in the morning, my biology just isn't working. It's not supposed to be awake. And that's why. And we know that this is genetic. You can't change your chronotype. So it started a long time ago. But over the kind of the last 10 years. I've then 10 or 15 years, I've then kind of developed every type of sleep problem. So it started off with, I've got a lot of arthritis in various joints. And so pain is a big problem for me. All football related. Football is so bad for your body. It really is. But so
in lots of ways.
Pain related problems. Yeah, well, playing football into your 40s is bad for your body. Let's rephrase that.
Definitely.
But anyway, so pain-related problems with sleeping at night. I then developed, after breaking my leg and ankle, developed depression, and so mental health-related problems with sleeping at night. The treatments for those things can also make you stop you from sleeping. So medication-related difficulties with sleeping. So I've really kind of been through all the different types, and that's. It really deepened my interest in sleep, and it's a fascinating area of science. It really, really is. And two is I've got real lived experience in that for quite a long time with lots of different types of sleep problems. And the more I learn and the more I kind of learn to manage my own sleep problems, the more I realize that there isn't anything out there for our NHS patients that we can do other than kind of throw sleeping tablets at them, which is what a lot of doctors do. And so that's really kind of where my passion started, and that's where I am now. I've really kind of grown my tool set, and I really kind of have kind of a real empathy for people who have difficulty sleeping, and so this is really where I want to focus my energy now.
Amazing. And I in a previous role before this, I used to teach genetics, genetic responses to one of the top genetic testing companies in the country, which actually identified your sleep. And so I know exactly what you're talking about when it comes to the, your gene responses and your chronotypes. However, what you have just done is you've just given every child in the country the absolute best excuse ever to their parents to say, it's not me that doesn't want to get up, it's my body, it's my genetics, which, as you know as doctors, as I do, it's the parents' fault. So actually, when you're getting told off in the morning that you haven't got out of bed, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. But I totally agree with all of that. So that's brilliant. That will definitely be a snippet from this podcast.
Oh. It's a very interesting point that you make, though, because the world really is geared towards morning types. Even though the morning types are just fractionally less common, the world is kind of rigged towards them.
Yeah.
And so evening types are naturally disadvantaged, but school kids, they, particularly in adolescence, so this kind of lazy teenager stereotype, your chronotype naturally shifts later. So a lot of these teenagers who are sleeping in, it isn't because they're lazy, it is because they are biologically predisposed. And so there's a real conversation to be had there. We're not too, school start times and those sorts of things, we're not too bad in this country. The States has had a real problem, schools starting at 6:30 or 7, and there's starting to be some shift in the understanding with that, because kids do much better with their learning when their start times at school is shifted a little bit later. So it's probably beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. It's a really interesting conversation.
Absolutely, this is a whole different podcast. I've got a 7-year-old, as you know, and I think he's already entered that stage. Is that possible? Maybe that's another podcast. But it's really evident that, and again, sometimes it's because, we didn't used to measure these things. People weren't aware of them, which is what you've alluded to, and why the Sleep Project has been kind of been born out of this recognition, both personally and also professionally, that sleep is a huge issue and there is no provision. But why do you guys think, Caitlin, start with you, why do you think there are more sleep disorders? I mean, one is obviously a measurement thing, but I don't think we can actually use that as the biggest excuse. Then what's your thinking between the factors behind the reason most of the people can't sleep?
I think there's a combination of factors, and it's really interesting looking at the data. They think we're probably sleeping 1 to 2 hours less than we were a century ago, which is massive.
Wow.
If you kind of look over a whole year, that's 730 days of less sleep, or 13 weeks less sleep over a year. That's massive if you're losing that much every night. And there's a combination of things that probably play into that. One is we're much more sedentary than we used to be.
Yeah.
And so office jobs where you're sat still and not doing exercise, when you are exercising, you sleep better, you sleep deeper, you sleep longer.
Totally.
So
yeah.
that's very important. But also the way that we currently live, that kind of modern living, always on culture, where we're always stimulated, our nervous systems are in overdrive. We have a work culture where actually if you work late, you stay up late, you skip your sleep, you go out in the evening socializing. Sleep is the bottom of the kind of priority list for lots of people. And so actually lots of things that we're doing stimulate our nervous systems in a way that makes it difficult to switch off, and often dampens those feelings of natural tiredness. So you might not feel like going to bed at 10 or 11 o'clock, and instead you're scrolling through your phones. And lots of these things are very addictive. And so there's lots of different things that we can do to change the way we live that can affect that. But we're in almost a toxic combination at the moment, where our working lives, our technological lives, and our reduced activity are all combining together to create this atmosphere where sleep is difficult.
Yeah, and everybody's heard these things, you only sleep when I'll sleep when I'm dead and all those sorts of things, and that kind of almost masculine kind of way of, I don't need sleep, I don't need my sleep. And it's absolutely untrue. I mean, we did a poll on LinkedIn the other day. We always run these tiny little polls and pop it out there and see what the people. But our respondents came back that 14% of respondents, are sleeping well and waking up energized. 14%. That was it. The rest of them, then fell into 3 other categories where 50% of respondents experienced poor quality or interrupted sleep. So it's half of people not actually feeling like, although they are asleep, they're not having great sleep. 41% of respondents saying that they enjoyed 7 or more hours of sleep per night, and 11% of respondents getting 5 or less hours per night. The obvious question I'm going to ask you is, what is the optimum number? Because that's what everybody always says. I sleep for 5 hours, but I get quality sleep. Okay, but how do you know that? And again, we'll talk about fitness trackers and sleep trackers and stuff in a minute. But what is that number? And is it different for people? And, what's the difference between quality and non-quality? There's a load of questions. Go.
Yeah, so quality is really important, but also there's a certain amount of sleep that each person needs.
Yeah.
And you see the graph, so you get told you need 8 hours of sleep a night, but actually it's different for every single person. 8 is kind of the average, but there's a variation between probably 7 to 9 in most adults. There's certain people who are short sleepers and sleep less, but actually those are really pretty rare. And you hear about people like Margaret Thatcher, who only slept for 4 hours a night. Yeah. And you kind of think, if I could just sleep 4 hours, I could be so much more efficient, I could get more things done. Yeah. But actually the truth is that if you neglect your sleep, your overall health and your performance suffers. And there's good studies to show that those people who aren't getting sufficient sleep, their cognitive function declines, they're not able to perform at their best, they take more sick days, they may be at their desk but not actually fully there. They're only operating on 20-40%. And so if you're not getting the amount of sleep that you need, then there's always going to be health consequences. And I guess your question is, how do you know how much you need? And the best way of knowing is how you feel in the morning.
Yeah.
If you wake up and you're feeling ready to go, and you ideally wake before your alarm and you feel refreshed and energized, then you're getting enough sleep.
Yeah.
If you wake up and you're either still tired, or the alternative is you're feeling wired, your heart is racing, you're feeling on edge, those are all warning signals from your body that it's not getting the sleep that it needs, and you're in a stress response from your body because it's having to work without the repair and the regeneration and the restorative process that happen at night. Because sleep is literally this kind of magical fountain of youth that kind of cleans and washes and fixes problems within the brain and the body. And if you're operating without it or without enough, there's going to be consequences.
Yeah. So, I mean, back in the day when I, used to be able to run and jump and do things, and even when I used to work as a performance director in professional sports, we always used to use the gauge that if your heart rate was elevated by 10 beats in the morning, which is never an easy thing to remember to do when you're, you've got kids and you've got busy work life and all that sort of stuff. But as an athlete, you've got nothing else to think about. We used to have this thing where, you'd wake up and you'd take your pulse, and if it was elevated by, sort of 8 to 10 beats, then actually you might skip the morning session. Now, that's easy to do if you're just thinking about sports, but you can't phone in work and say, excuse me, my heart rate's elevated this morning, so I'm not going to do any work. But is that a real thing? I mean, it's something that we were told a long, long time ago, something that we've used. I don't know if does it have any value to people as a test to see if you've got enough sleep?
I'm not sure. Go on, Eidn.
Well, I was going to say, I think there's a couple of factors at play there. I think one is that there is literally no system in your body that is not affected by sleep.
Yeah.
Your respiratory system, your cardiovascular system, your digestive system.
Yeah.
So if you're not sleeping, your body is going to feel the toll of that. Things are not going to work quite as efficiently. So that can push your heart rate up a little bit, and that can be a sign that you've not slept as well. But the flip side also is that having a slightly higher heart rate than usual can be a sign that your, what we call your sympathetic nervous system response, your fight or flight response, your stress response is overactive. And that can make you, that can impair good sleep.
Yeah. So
it can be a bit of a chicken and egg. Is my heart rate up because I haven't slept as well, or have I not slept as well because my heart rate is up?
Gotcha.
So it's difficult to kind of
use that
tease
as a
out
tool.
Which way around that is, and often it's often it's a bit of both, really.
Yeah.
Often it's a bit of both. You're a bit more stressed, or you're a bit worried about. In your case, it might be a competition that's coming up, a race or whatever that's coming up, and you're kind of stressed about how you're going to perform there. Which then leads to you not sleeping as well, which then leads to your heart rate going up a little bit further.
And then you just get stuck in this thing. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I mean, do you think it's all about education, isn't it? And do you think there's enough education around? Because, like you say, it's in its infancy in terms of the sleep studies, and how we're now correlating what's happening to just the way that Western society has developed, and this kind of work kind of culture that's kind of developed. But sleep education, clearly there's not enough sleep education, because that's why you guys do all the great stuff you do at the at the Sleep Project. But in terms of the impact on mental and physical, you've kind of touched on it, but in terms of insufficient sleep, if it's below the 7 hours, like you say, and it's very rare that you get an outlier that can go less than that, and 5 hours is probably a no for 99.9% of people. But what actual effect for those people, because everybody knows how much sleep they get, but not everybody knows the effects of it or understands it. So if you were to say, look, it has this effect on your mental health, maybe Caitlin, you could answer that one, and then it has this effect on your physical health, and maybe you could answer that one, Eidn. We'll start with the mental health, but what is the effect of less than optimal sleep on your mental health, would you say, Caitlin?
So there's a really close link between sleep and mental health, and it's a two-way street. Almost every mental health condition is associated with disrupted sleep, and in fact, you can predict a major episode of depression 2 weeks before by looking at the sleep patterns.
Wow.
It's that closely linked that you will see classic changes, particularly in the dream sleep, 2 weeks before. And if you spot that, you say there is going to be a major mental health crisis on the way. But also, if you help people sleep, they can have a huge positive benefit on people's mental health. And so the two are so important to focus on. And if you get your sleep right, your mental health will improve.
Fun. That is just brilliant educative information that everybody should know that. And to know that you can predict an episode of mental health based on sleep just highlights the importance of that sleep. So that's enough in my book to say why sleep is important, but it has that much effect on everything. What's the physical argument for sleep then, Eidn?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, it kind of filters down and affects every single bodily system. But I think if we're going to pick probably the most important effect, it would be on the metabolic system, on your body's metabolism. So not getting sufficient sleep will increase your risk of diabetes. Yeah. It will push your blood pressure up, increases your risk of heart attacks and strokes, increases your risk of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And harking back to what we were saying a minute ago, Margaret Thatcher and the other kind of famous sleep when I'm dead person was Ronald Reagan. Yeah. And I don't think it's any coincidence that both of them developed Alzheimer's disease and died of it. Wow. So it's really kind of the metabolic effects have a real knock-on effect for everything else. One interesting one that I think people kind of in the lifestyle sphere will be interested in is because of the effects on metabolism, the effects that it'll have on your weight. We know that if you're not sleeping properly, you will have a tendency to start gaining weight. And sleeping better is one of the best kind of weight loss aids. And that's to do with the metabolic effects and the different hormones that are secreted when you're asleep that help you to kind of process energy and process fats more efficiently and more effectively.
I mean, this is fascinating, and I've got a load of questions to ask you just on everything. But I mean, those two things alone, in isolation, would be enough to convince people. And this is what this is really about. This podcast is just trying to get that information out to people, because a lot of people will do one or two things. They'll either ignore stuff or they'll Google it, and then they'll make their own minds up conveniently to please, their preconceived kind of thought patterns on stuff. And what a lot of people we see these days doing is, there's a lot of sleep trackers or bots or whatever you want to call these things, apps out there. I'm not going to name any of them because I don't want to end up in a courtroom or anything. But effectively tracking your sleep with a digital device. What are your thoughts on those, Caitlin and Eidn? Start with you, Caitlin.
They're not that accurate at the moment because most of them are based on movement, and we all naturally move in our sleep, and we go through different phases of sleep, whether it's deeper and lighter sleep and dream sleep, and often have a period of waking in between where we may move, we may change position but not be aware of it, and that's part of normal sleep. They're not very good at picking up the different phases of sleep or whether we actually are asleep or not. And so overall, they're not that accurate. The other thing that they do, which for me is a big negative as a sleep practitioner, they tend to cause you to become more anxious about your sleep. And if you're someone who's not sleeping well, the thing that you want to avoid more than anything is anxiety about your sleep. Because as Eidn said, sleep is one thing where the harder you try, the more difficult it is to get to sleep.
Yeah.
It's an automatic process that happens within our bodies. And if we start messing with it and having stress hormones thrown in that are worrying about sleep, you then turn off the switch that allows you to move to sleep. And there's actually a medical condition, I can never pronounce the name, so I'll hand over to Eidn for this, but where people become so obsessed with their sleep trackers that they actually develop a whole new type of insomnia based around anxiety and their trackers.
It's not yet a kind of an internationally recognized sleep disorder, but I'm sure it will get there. It's called orthosomnia, and it's where people get so obsessed with their sleep data from trackers and those sorts of things, and it starts to kind of have a counter. It starts to be counterproductive.
Yeah.
I think that sleep trackers are here to stay. There's no getting rid of them. They will get more accurate over time. I'm certain of that. I think there's no kind of single answer to this. If you're the kind of person who wearing a sleep tracker gives you that information that then leads you to changing your behavior and improving your sleep, that's great. I've got lots of friends who have realized that I don't use one myself, but lots of friends who realize that even if they have one beer in the evening, it will have a significant knock-on effect on their sleep.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. I think that kind of awareness that different behaviors, different things do impact on our sleep is really important. And if that leads to behavior change, then that's brilliant. If you're the type of person who is going to be hyper focused on exactly how much sleep you've had and exactly what time you get to sleep and exactly how much of your sleep is REM sleep and how much of it is deep sleep, that kind of level of focus is counterproductive, because what we really need is for people to give themselves what we call enough sleep opportunity, to have that awareness of the good habits that promote sleep, to make sure you're giving yourself enough opportunity to sleep, but trying to focus on your sleep and like what Caitlin said, actually trying to sleep is counterproductive. In fact, there's a really interesting study that shows for people with insomnia, trying to stay awake is more effective at getting them to sleep than trying to sleep. And that's something that we sometimes use, and it forms part of one of our sleep programs. It's called paradoxical intention. So for people who are trying to, for people who have poor sleep, actually deliberately trying to stay awake is more effective at helping them to sleep. It's interesting.
Wow, that is interesting. The human brain, eh? Just very quickly, because you talk about the stages of sleep, because a lot of stuff that I hear from people that are using sleep trackers and stuff, it's like, oh, well, how often do you sleep a night? Oh, 5.5 hours. Okay, yeah, but I get 3.5 hours of quality sleep. And so, this is kind of sometimes tends to come from people that are not hitting the 7 to 8, 9 hours, and it's kind of like the justification of, well, yeah, I know I'm only in bed for 5.5 hours, but actually I get quality sleep for 2.5, 3 hours, and it's kind of like, and that kind of gives that self-justification of, okay, well, I'm okay if I go for 5.5 hours sleep because I get 2.5 hours of quality sleep. What would your thoughts and advice be on somebody that is in bed for 5.5 hours and only getting 2.5 hours of quality sleep? And what would you say that quality sleep is 5 stages of sleep? Is it REM? Is it deep? How does that work? Because I think there's a big misunderstanding as to how sleep happens, if that makes sense. And what and obviously the length of time that you're in bed allows you more time to get into deeper sleep and REM sleep and all those things. Could you kind of elaborate a little bit more about how sleep, should we say, works, and then what that argument is about sleep being deep or light, and whether there's an argument for quality sleep over quantity of sleep?
Caitlin, do you want to take the one on how sleep works? Because I've got some thoughts on the sleep tracker side of things.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Sleep, you can think of it a bit like a washing machine cycle.
Yeah.
So when you go to sleep, various different processes happen throughout the night, and actually all of those are important. There used to be this idea that deep sleep is the best, or REM sleep is the most important, but actually there's increasing evidence that each of the stages has its role and is really important for different things. One of the things that they're starting to discover about the kind of stage 2 sleep, that kind of light sleep, is you get lots of sleep spindles, and sleep spindles are really important in memory processes, in preventing dementia, that these go down when you start to have dementia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease and certain mental health conditions, chronic pain. And so it's impossible to say, I got great deep sleep, so that's all I need. Each of those stages are vitally important. The deep sleep is really important because the neurons of the brain contract and relax and almost squeeze out all the toxins from the brain, and it's literally like a cleaning process that happens. So deep sleep is really important, and that mainly happens towards the earlier stages of the night. So normally your first half of the night is more focused on the deep sleep. Later on in the kind of early hours of the morning, the subsequent stages are more about dream sleep. And dream sleep is vitally important for memories, but also for emotional processing. So, for example, there's a link between major episodes of depression and disturbance in your dream sleep. Post-traumatic stress disorder is thought to be a problem with processing those emotions. And what happens during the dream sleep is it separates the part of the memory from the emotional part of the memory. So you can remember the time that you were hit by the car and learn not to step out in the road in the same way, but without every time you think about it having the same physical and emotional memory that's attached to it.
Wow.
So each of those stages is really important.
Amazing.
And the timing of those stages is also really important. So, for example, the different hormones get secreted at different times during the night, and they're absolutely perfectly timed with our circadian rhythm, which is set. We can't shift our circadian rhythm by more than probably about half an hour each night. So an example would be growth hormone. So growth hormone is secreted in the early hours, so the first hour or two after you go to bed. And it's vitally important for repair and for immunity and for looking after our body's wellness. But if you go to bed, for example, an hour or two later, you miss that opportunity, and the growth hormone is secreted at the wrong time and it's not able to have the repairing effect. And so for that reason, it's really important that one of the biggest benefits, almost more important than the number of hours, is having a regular sleep cycle where you go to bed at approximately the same time and you wake up at the same time each morning. So your sleep cycle is absolutely primed for each stage of when the hormones are going to be released.
Brilliant. And just for everybody listening, because not everybody knows all of the medical terms, but a circadian rhythm, in a very short layman's terms kind of explanation of what that is.
Our circadian rhythm is our internal body clock.
Yep.
Every single cell in our body has an internal body clock, and it is programmed towards night and day. It's around 24 hours. It means even if we were locked inside a cave with no darkness, no external stimulation, we'd still have a 24-hour cycle and sleep approximately the same amount, around 8 hours or so, every single night over a 24-hour period.
Wow. I mean, I've just got... that's perfect. Perfect answer. But my brain now goes into, whoa, is that how time was invented? What came first, circadian rhythm or time? Because obviously we're a social, we invented time. Anyway, we'll leave that one there for the time being. But that's got my brain going. That's fantastic because, again, sometimes I think where the problems lie with people understanding stuff is sometimes terminology. And, we just try and keep this really simple and easy to explain. So part 2 of the question, obviously, Eidn, then is over to you. That was fantastic. Love the washing machine analogy. Thank you for explaining circadian rhythms. Eidn, part 2, trackers, etc. What's your
so
thoughts?
The sleep trackers thing. So it's interesting. And what you were describing a minute ago, I think might be one of the areas where sleep trackers are fairly unhelpful to the conversation. So there's a couple of things. The first is like Caitlin said, they're not that accurate. They're probably 70 to 80% accurate in terms of whether we're asleep or not. They tend to overread how much we've slept. They over-report the amount of sleep. But when it comes to actually detecting what phase of sleep we are, what stage of sleep we are, they're much, much less accurate at that. Not very accurate at all at that. So there's no kind of sleep tracker that is certified for that properly. So they're not very good at detecting this type of sleep. But with people who are shortening the amount of time that they're sleeping, like the example that you gave, somebody sleeping 5 hours, but it's all good sleep. There are a few people who can sleep 5 hours and have no ill effects, but there really are few and far between. Yep. For the rest of the people who are sleeping 5 hours or so, what will happen is your body will naturally take up more of that will be deep sleep than the other stages of sleep. And that's because of the way the order of your sleep cycles. It's in the first part of the night, deep sleep tends to be predominant. The second part of the night, it tends to be REM sleep that's predominant. But if you're delaying your sleep or if you're waking up early, you'll miss out on that last portion of sleep, the REM sleep. So I think a lot of people who think, well, I'm sleeping 5 hours, but it says that, a good proportion of that is deep sleep. Well, one, we can't really believe that too much. And two is they will be missing out on a lot of their REM sleep. And sometimes it's labeled as dream sleep. People might not attach as much importance to that as they do to deep sleep. But like Caitlin says, it's so important for so many different functions, but memory and emotional processing being two of the really big ones. So I think that you like we say, you need all the different forms, you need all the different stages of sleep, and you need them in the right amount. So to say that I've had a significant amount of deep sleep doesn't cut it really.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's one of the places where sleep trackers can perhaps falsely reassure people.
Yeah, and I think the just very, very quickly in terms of the stages of sleep, just going from stage 1 to 5 or whatever the stages of sleep are now considered to be, because that seems to change every now and then. But what I'm obviously hearing from you guys is that effectively light sleep is just as important as deep sleep, as important as REM sleep, and that's why you need to be in bed for those 7 hours, because it takes that long for those things to happen. And obviously what you've just said there, Eidn, which is I've just picked up on, is that people always go, oh yeah, but I fall asleep really quickly, and my tracker's telling me I'm in deep sleep straight away. But what you've just said there is it doesn't necessarily mean that it goes from there to there to there to there, or what order does those sleep stages come in? Because Caitlin, you were saying you kind of wake up a bit, move a bit, you're not, it's not a predominantly succinct process of going from here to here. It's kind of in and out of different stages, but those stages occur at different times, which is why you need a longer time in bed so that you hit all of those at the right quantities, I guess.
Yeah, and just to pick up on what you said, if you fall asleep within 15 minutes of hitting your head hitting the pillow, you're almost certainly sleep deprived. Most people, it takes about 15 minutes to go to sleep. That's about the average. And if your head hits the pillow and you're asleep instantly in your deep sleep, that means you're not giving yourself enough sleep opportunity.
Makes sense.
And your body is so craving sleep that it just immediately sucks up any opportunity you give it. So that person needs to sleep a little bit more.
Yeah, brilliant. Love it. I love that. That's really, really, really easy to understand as well, which is the point. Okay, so in terms of the sleep stages, just kind of talk us through the different stages and how does it happen? Does it go from there to there, or do you go in and out of stages multiple times?
Yeah, so the textbook way, which is how it's kind of taught, is that you start with stage 1 sleep, which is not really a stage of sleep itself. It's more like a transition between wakefulness and being asleep. Stage 1 sleep only lasts a few minutes, really. You then go into stage 2 sleep, which is light sleep. And to touch back on what you were saying, yeah, all of those different phases of sleep, all the different stages of sleep are just as important as each other because they all have different functions. So stage 2 sleep is, if you were having a daytime nap, that's what you would be predominantly in. It helps with memory, concentration, and cognitive function. And you would maybe spend kind of 20 to 30 minutes in stage 2 sleep before then going on to stage 3 sleep, which is deep sleep. Now, you were alluding to kind of the number of sleep stages changing and that kind of a thing. There did used to be medium deep sleep and very deep sleep. We just lump them together now as one. So you have stage 1, which is the transition, stage 2, which is light sleep, stage 3, which is deep sleep, and then the 4th is your REM sleep. So you usually go stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, deep sleep for another kind of 20, 30 minutes, depends on the time of the night as well. And then you cycle back up through the stages and then into a period of REM sleep. And at the beginning of the night, the first part of the night, the REM sleep, the dream sleep stages are shorter. And then as the night goes on, they get gradually longer as the deep sleep stages get gradually shorter. So each kind of sleep cycle lasts approximately 90 minutes, and you'll have kind of 4 or 5 of those through a night's sleep, basically.
Okay, and look, my maths is not the best, but effectively through 90 minutes, you should be hitting those sleep cycles. You know, you 6-7 hours, you're doing that 4 times. Is that a pattern? Is that what happens in layman's terms?
That's how it should work. That's how it should work. That's the ideal. It's not 90 minutes exactly for everybody. That's obviously an average. In the morning, you'll often, especially if you're using an alarm to wake you up, you'll often wake up in the middle of one of those cycles rather than naturally at the end. But yeah, the idea is that you get as many of those kind of nice, clean sleep cycles in as you can to provide all the function that sleep provides.
Okay. Well, this is probably the time when I should own up, which I know you know because you picked up on a comment I put on LinkedIn earlier. But actually, this morning I slept in because my alarm didn't go off, but I woke up an hour later, which obviously is close to another 90 minutes of another set of those stages. So clearly I was sleep deprived, because if I was rested, as you say, Caitlin, and I would have woken up at the time when my alarm was, which every now and then I do that. You know, you always get that thing, don't you, where you wake up 5 minutes before your alarm, which tends to annoy a lot of people, and they go, oh, bloody hell, I've just woken up before my alarm. Why? But actually your body said, no, you're ready to wake up. And obviously this morning when I slept in, wasn't planned because I was coming on a sleep podcast, but effectively me not setting for some reason my alarm didn't go off, but my body told me to wake up an hour later because I absolutely needed that extra hour of sleep.
So the fact that you needed that extra hour is probably a red flag that you should have a look at how much sleep you're getting over a week, because a lion's great, and in kind of a lion now and then certainly won't do you any harm, but it's telling you that across the week you've missed out on some sleep and that your body needs to catch up. And in an ideal position, you wouldn't want your body to be craving sleep like that. You want to be adequately rested so that you wake up at the same time every day before your alarm goes off or around that time, and that you don't have lions at the weekend. Because actually, there's been some really good data that says the time that you wake up in the morning and its consistency is vitally important for your overall well-being and health. And the closer you can keep that time as consistent, the greater the sleep benefits.
Yeah, and consistency is key in everything that I always talk about. And typically, normally, that's how I operate. I normally wake up in the morning, 7:10, and then go and train for an hour before I have to do the school run. And that's how I kind of manage my lifestyle. But last night, interestingly enough, and I won't call the person out because it was me and my reason was to send the email last night. But 10:30 last night, I was on my laptop sending emails. So it then pushed everything else back because I'm also a bit of a night owl with my genotype. and effectively I don't like going to bed. All the good stuff's on telly later. That's what they used to say, but Netflix kind of counteracts that argument. But it's just having that time to yourself. So I do know that if I am on my laptop later on at night, it does wake my brain up and keeps me awake longer, which prevents me going, and then I do have that problem in the morning. Typically my alarm would go off and I'd have that standard thing of, oh bloody hell, I've got to get up. But knowing that I forced myself into my consistent pattern, however, this time it didn't go off and my body went, you're not getting up here, you need another hour. So it makes total sense to me. I know that if I'm on my laptop late at night, it is not a good thing. So there you go. I guess that's just what's happened to me this morning.
I mean, we understand that there's life, there's things that happen, there's people's birthdays, there's parties, there's all the good stuff in life, and life is for living, and absolutely have those treats, go out and do things, enjoy things, but make sure that you do try when it's possible to have that consistency. And if you know that you're having a night out, have an out before, do a little bit of catch up sleep before you know you're going to miss your sleep. Can work really well.
So I've got a question, because obviously Suzanne prepares lots of the questions, because we get asked lots of questions, and I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway based on everything that you're saying. But is it possible to overdo sleep? Effectively, could I just answer what I think based on what I've learned today? I would say no, because your body will wake you up when you are ready to wake up. So can you sleep too long? Is that possible? I don't know.
I think you're right. In a word, we think no. There are so many benefits that sleep bring, and there isn't really anything that has suggested that sleeping too much is going to have an opposite effect. But I think where this comes from is some studies where they have shown that people who sleep consistently more than 10 or 11 hours do, on average, tend to die a little sooner. So it is associated with a slightly higher mortality. Now, sleeping too little is associated with much greater mortality.
Yeah, sure.
But as you sleep more and more, the curve comes down, and then there's just a little flick up at the end.
Wow.
And what we think is that is very likely due to people in that kind of, a lot of the people, not all of the people who sleep in 10 or 11 hours, but a lot of the people in there have other medical
underlying
problems.
Conditions,
and so they're getting poor quality sleep. So they may have chronic pain, they may have other diseases that are impacting on their sleep.
Yep.
So they have poor quality sleep, and they need to get more of it in order to feel well rested. And so it's not the sleep itself that's causing the greater mortality risk, but the underlying health problem that they've got already. So that's where we're at the moment. But I think that's where the question has come from, really. Can you have too much sleep? Is probably from some of those studies that showed people on the far end of the spectrum do have a slightly higher mortality risk.
Makes perfect sense. So as we sort of coming towards the close, then, sleep being the biggest issue that is, what would your kind of top tips and sort of what's the most essential thing, would you say, for good quality or getting good quality sleep? So Caitlin, if you kind of give us a couple of tips that you would say are the most important, then Eidn, maybe, because it's clear that it's affected by lots of things, but how, if all these other external pressures are on me and affecting me and social lives and all this sort of stuff, what would you say are the consistent things that you should do? Something that I learned a long time ago was, if I take my pillow with me wherever I go, I can sleep anywhere very well, but I have lost a lot of pillows to a lot of places because I've forgotten to take it home with me. So, my pillow goes everywhere with me, everywhere, even to friends' houses. And as I've got older, I've included slippers in that as well, which has caused a lot of hilarity between my friends. But what would be your top tips for, trying to establish some really good sleeping sort of behaviours?
I think a really good one is bedtime routines are not just for children.
Yeah.
Often we're really good with our kids at having a warm bath, reading a nice story, dimming the lights, calming down the energy levels, preparing them for sleep. And the reason we do it with our kids is because it works, but it works really well for adults too.
Makes sense.
What happens is our nervous systems start to kind of slow down the kind of nervous activity and switch from the sympathetic, which is the kind of stress, fight or flight, to the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest side of our nervous system. And when you do that, you start to feel more sleepy, you find it easier to fall asleep, and your body will get better quality sleep, because when you're in a stress response, you tend to stay in light sleep and not get into those deeper and REM sleep stages. So bedtime routines, and it doesn't have to be a bath and a story, though a bath or a hot shower is really good for sleep, but come up with something that's relaxing for you and do the same thing each evening.
Perfect.
And that includes, as you said, switching off technology about an hour before, not because of the light, because the blue light doesn't have too much impact, but because it's very stimulating for the brain.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And actually, when you frame it like that, why do we do? I mean, as a parent, you kind of do that for your kids because like, just go to sleep. So you do everything possible to help them to go to sleep, but then you don't do it for yourself. It makes perfect sense. I mean, sometimes you just got to look at yourself in the mirror and look at what you've been doing elsewhere. I mean, it's a revelation, if I'm being honest. Eidn, do you want to add any of your kind of thoughts and thinking to that?
Yeah, I guess so. For people who sleep okay anyway, I would say make sure you're giving yourself enough sleep opportunity. I think that's the big one.
Yep.
But for people who are having a bit of difficulty sleeping, or if you want to try and really maximise your sleep, and don't like the term perfect your sleep, because there's no such thing as perfect sleep, but if you really want to kind of maximise your sleep, then making sure you are getting the most out of your body's biology. This going back to this circadian rhythm thing that we were talking about earlier. And I think the two biggest things there would be making sure you're getting up at the same time every morning, regardless of whether you're working or it's the weekend. Every morning, get your circadian rhythm used to what time you wake up in the morning. Get it, what we call entrain your circadian rhythm. And the second thing is, when you do that, when you get up, go outside and get half an hour of natural light. Natural light in the morning is probably the most important thing for really kind of fixing and entraining your natural circadian rhythm. And the better you entrain your circadian rhythm, the more your sleep cycle is in sync with your biology, and the easier you'll find it to sleep.
Brilliant. And that is the second time one of our experts has come on and said, in the morning, the best thing you can do is get up and get outside and breathe fresh air and oxygen. So yeah, again, brilliant. And for me, this has been a fantastic podcast because it's the most reported issue that we see on our platform. Just February and March, our sleep key wellbeing indicator, or KWI, was coming in at 42%. March, it was coming in at 56%. The trends over the last 6 months, the correlation between sleep, workplace contribution, and energy just demonstrates that sleep has such a massive effect on us, not just in our personal lives, but how that affects us within the workplace as well, just our overall performance. And it is always, and I'm fearful that it will always be, a consistent low performing KWI for every organisation that works with us through Wellonomics, and it seems to be getting worse. So I've learned a lot today out of all of the things that you've talked about. Certainly made me think about a lot of things, and I'm hoping that this is also forms part of that education. Now, if you have a more serious problem, there are obviously all the fantastic programs that we have with you guys throughout the Sleep Project. And again, if everybody wants to know anything more about that, then please do get in touch with us. But honestly, this has been brilliant. I think we could go on for another hour or two if Zoom let us, or the internet didn't go down, or all the other problems that we've had today. But thank you so much for joining me. It has been an absolute eye-opener and revelation, and I hope that everybody gets as much out of this as what I have personally. But sleep really is that important, and that's the message that I get from you. It's about consistency. It's about getting yourself into routines. It's about treating yourself with the same love and attention that you do your kids. That's a very powerful message that I've got from that. And also, sleep affects everything. and you need to be asleep for as long as everybody says. There is no way to cheat sleep, because if you cheat sleep, you cheat your own health and well-being. And that, I think, is as simple as that. It is the fundamental thing that helps everybody be as good as they can be. So thank you so much again for today. It's been brilliant.